Hi everybody, Keith Tanner here from Flyin Miata, and today we're doing another FM Drives. This time we're talking about Pokee. Pokee is a 1995 M Edition that Flyin Miata has owned since new. This is a one-owner car, and it's been in the Flyin Miata family since 1995, which at the time of this filming is pretty much 27 years. Over the years, this car has been used for almost every sort of Miata modification that uses the stock BP engine. It's been turbocharged, it's been supercharged, it's been turbocharged again, it's been supercharged again, back and forth. We keep on modifying this car. It's also been used for chassis development. It's had dozens of different suspension kits bolted up to it. Pretty much anything that we have offered over the last 27 years was tried out on this car at one point or another. Today, it's set up as a street car. It's not a hard-on-track car. This has been used as a powertrain development car most recently. And today it's running a 2-liter bored and stroked BP engine, lots of strength inside, fairly large 3071 turbo, and it's got a power level of about 300 horsepower right now. Now the power level in this car right now can change because it's set up for flex fuel. So if we feed it full of E85 ethanol fuel, we can turn the boost up. The ECU will actually compensate for that, throw in more timing, allow the boost to go higher. It'll make about 425 at the wheels. But today we're running on 91 pump gas as if it was basically a daily driver commuter, which is effectively what it's been. And at that point, we're making about 300. So now we'll jump in, we'll take this car for a ride. I'll try to give you an experience of what it's like to actually drive this car, what it feels like, what the big turbo, the big engine, relatively speaking, feels like, along with some of the other modifications. So let's jump in and go for a drive. All right, so the first thing you notice when you're driving this car is that it's an interesting sort of mix of eras inside because it's been part of the family for so long. It's had so many different things done to it. Like this steering wheel, this Momo Ray steering wheel was the thing to have in the late 90s. But then it's got some newer parts to it, like this Turbo Smart boost gauge, and it's a little bit of a throwback in a lot of ways. So one thing you notice right away on this car is the manual steering. Bill changed it out years ago, back in 1995, because he preferred the feel of the factory manual racks. It's not a depowered power rack. It is actually a factory manual rack, so it's got the slightly slower ratio, a little more mechanical advantage, and it's got that very live feel that you get from a manual rack that's moving around underneath your fingertips. It's a little surprising to find in a 95M because, of course, those were all power steering, but it reflects the history of the car, and it does give a lot of feel, which a lot of purists really do prefer this rack. The nice thing is that once you're moving, it comes alive. It becomes much easier to drive. You're not working as hard. Once you're out of the parking lot, it's a lot more comfortable. It's also got a fairly heavy clutch, and that's needed to keep up with the power of this engine. Other than the fact that the clutch is fairly heavy, all the other controls are exactly normal Miata controls. It's a normal shifter, normal steering rack. I mean, the view out the front, other than a boost gauge, is basically stock Miata, so you really have no idea what's hiding under hood. It's what you might call a Q-ship. It's a very subtle little car in a lot of ways. So this car is equipped with one of our stroker motors, which means that we bored and stroked that little BP out to pretty much exactly 2 liters. And it's got a big turbo attached to it. So the big engine, relatively speaking, allows us to spin that turbo up, but it also gives a fair bit of torque down low. Again, not relative to V8 cars, but relative to a 4-cylinder. So it's a very flexible power plant, and it has that ability to sort of hide in the background. The exhaust system is one of our 3-inch mufflers, 3-inch exhaust pipes, allows for much faster spool, but it also has this really nice tone that never really gets obnoxious. It just kind of purrs in the background. It's actually a really nice sounding exhaust. I've always liked it. The suspension that's on the car right now, and this is a snapshot of the car at this point in its development, but right now it's running our V-maxx Extreme Track Pack, which is a little stiffer than you might often use for a street car, but in this case it's working pretty well. We've given it lots of ride height, so it's got room to move around. And it makes for a very comfortable, very easy car to drive around in. The neat thing about the flex fuel in this car is that you can simply, by changing the fuel you feed into the fuel tank, it will adjust itself. It's got an ethanol sensor in the fuel line, and it will add boost, it will add timing, and basically take advantage of the octane you feed it. So this is a very flexible, it literally is a flex fuel car in that it will respond to whatever you feed it. Right now it's got 91 octane pump gas, so it's running about 300 at the wheels, which is a good long-term setup. I mean, this transmission, this factory 6-speed will handle that power level for a good long period of time. But if you want to have a little more fun, you put in the E85 mix, and this thing can be north of 400 horsepower. A little bit much for your average street commuter car, perhaps, but you know, whatever floats your boat, it's right there for you if you want. Now this car is set up to be a street car. This is not a no compromises track car, so it's not trying to beat me up right now. As you might have seen in the exterior shots, it's lifted fairly high, so we've got the ground clearance, we've got the suspension travel that we want for road use. The biggest thing you notice is simply the weight of a couple of the controls. The clutch and the steering are a little heavier than I often go for personally, but they give the car a very solid planted feel. One thing that's surprising about this car, given it's a 27-year-old Miata that's been used as a science experiment its whole life, is how rigid the chassis feels. Now some of that's because of the various braces and things that we've developed and we've bolted on over the years, but we also put structural foam in the frame rails years ago. It was back in the 90s sometime. And it actually worked very well on this car. It didn't work as well on some of the others, but on this one, it's made for a very rigid feeling chassis. I spend a lot of time driving very high horsepower cars. I mean, I drove to work this morning in a car with 400 horsepower, as you do. And one of the things that always strikes me about this car is how well it hides its performance. The nature of turbo cars in general mean that if you're not in boost, if you're not shifting aggressively, the turbo fades in the background and you're just left with a fairly normal car. It doesn't shout about what's under hood. But then when you get a chance to get on it, there's this huge hand comes down and just pushes you forward. And in this car, with the big turbo in particular, below 4,000 RPM, it's got more power, it's got more boost down low than a smaller turbo car does. But when you get above 4, it really wakes up, and that's when the hand that pushes you forward gets very, very large. It's easy to make a car like this. It's a dyno queen that just makes that one big peak number, but is just a brute to drive. And that is not what we're after here. This car has got the manners and the ability and has been a regular daily driver. So this is a car that you can take anywhere. We can take it across the country. You can drive it to work when driving the car is not your primary objective. That's the hard part about tuning a car, is getting it to be able to do that sort of thing. It's a fun car to drive day to day because of that hidden performance. It doesn't shout about it. It doesn't make you pay a penalty for having it. You know, the V8 cars, I love the V8 cars to the bottom of my heart, but they never let you forget that that engine is there. There's always that rumble, there's always that bit of vibration. There's always the feel that you do have a big engine under your foot at all times. This car doesn't do that. It hides behind a little bit of whooshing, a little bit of extra huffing and puffing under hood, but generally speaking, you don't know it's there until you get a chance to let it off the leash. So it's a Jekyll and Hyde thing. You can drive it around like a normal car, acting like a normal, responsible member of society, with no hint of what's actually going on under hood. And then you can open it up, and all of a sudden you're doing 75 miles an hour. It's a softer hit than the V8s. It doesn't punch you in the back of the head the same way, but the car just starts to pull like a freight train, and you don't realize where it's coming from the way that you do with the V8s, with the big engine pulling you along. It's kind of fun. I've always liked giving customers rides in this car because I drive it around like a normal Miata and talk to them, and they kind of forget. And then you unleash it, and it just takes off. It's a fun trick to play. People either laugh like crazy, or they get very quiet, one or the other. Once you get to a bit of open road, wakes right up. Other than the fact that it's got this big power plant hiding under the hood, this is basically just a time capsule of a 95 M Edition. It's got a couple of period modifications. The gauges are an older design, but generally speaking, this is not an overtly modified car. It hasn't always been that way. There used to be extra gauges on top of here, and there were a lot more parts attached to it, but since it got converted to road car use, it's become much more subtle. I mean, it's even still got the factory CD player. That was a pretty expensive option back in the day. This car was actually Jeremy's daily driver, and Jeremy was our ECU tuning specialist, well, still is. And every day he'd get to work and he'd sit in the car for half an hour or 20 minutes and sit there and play with it and tweak that one little thing that had been bothering him. And the maps in this car are also based on the customer base that we have of hundreds of these turbo Miatas running this ECU, so it's actually a very well sorted little car. You don't have to make any sacrifices for the performance it's got. You don't have to drive around anything. You don't have to deal with trying to keep it alive on cold idle. It doesn't start when it doesn't stall when you turn the headlights on. All of those terrible behaviors that you get on tuner cars that are just kind of hacked together to make that one peak dyno number, they don't exist in this one because this car has had 20 odd years to become the car that it is. Anybody can make a dyno monster. The hard part's making one you can drive day in, day out. And that's what this car has actually been doing most recently. It's been used just as a regular commuter car. Well, I hope you enjoyed that ride along in Pokee, our 95 Turbo M Edition. For more FM drives, check out our YouTube channel, our Facebook page, like, comment, subscribe, all the usual. We're always trying to put together things that you will enjoy, so let us know in the comments what sort of things you want to see. And as always, thanks for your attention. I'm Keith Tanner from Flyin Miata. Thanks for coming by.